Welcome to the Shield Your Business from Chaos podcast, where there's no building, no people, no third-party suppliers, and no systems all combined to create Chaos the Dragon, which is battled by King Phoenix and his shield. Hi, this is Skip Williams, co-founder of KISSBCP. Roswitha and I were so excited to get into this topic of tabletop exercises, we forgot to hit record until we had already started talking. So apologies for no intro, so we're having to do one after the fact. I hope everybody enjoys the show.
But I also think, the whole lean concept contributed to it because, that was kind of, I think, when the tide started to shift as far as resourcing.
Yeah.
That you just simply you couldn't pull, okay, well, let's pull 2 DBAs and let's pull a SQL guy and let's grab these team members to support this exercise. And we still have people who can support production.
Yeah.
Once everybody went lean, I think the ability to do that really kind of went away also.
Well, and a little bit of it too is that, like, thinking of it from the non-DR side of it, just like from the individual business units, like more from, I guess, the BC side of it, is that it was always a recommendation that we had where we had said to managers, I guess, that, run accounting, run finance, run sales was never an issue. If it was extra, if they were outside salespeople, run help desk was 50-50 if you could get it to do it. Run them from home just on any given day of the week. Like, it doesn't matter. Just, like for one day a week or one payroll cycle or whatever, run accounting from home just to make sure that it would actually work. And that was always met with about 15 levels of consternation because they're like, well, they're going to be at home. They're not going to do anything. They're going to be, you're like, well, our recommendation is that you do some work from home stuff before you're forced to do some work from home stuff.
Yeah.
Well, now with COVID, or since COVID, everybody's like, oh yeah, sure, I can work from home, no problem. I got this totally figured out. And it's like, yeah, they do, because they had 2 years experience at it. And so I don't know how gruesome the growing pains were for those to go from 100% in office to 100% from home. I know, talking to a couple of our customers, that some did it a very interesting way. Like, they pretty much said, okay, they told them on like Thursday, okay, tomorrow at the end of the day, you're going to be working from home. Take anything and everything that you need from your desk and take it home. And I was like, holy cow, like IT is allowing accounting to carry their computers out of the building. That's crazy, because normally you couldn't do anything without IT losing their mind. If you moved more than like your mouse, they were freaking out at you. But they took all their stuff and they took it home. They took their chairs home and everything else. They set it all up at home. And then, they worked like that for a year, I guess, or whatever. And then once they started coming back into the office a little bit, instead of bringing any of that stuff from home back into the office, they just bought all new stuff for the office. So they had, in essence, 2 workstations, one at home and one at the office. And it was like, okay. And we've seen other groups where they were maybe a little more portable, and so they only had a laptop, and so they could just take their laptop back and forth. But the thing that has been unanimous, I don't know where that came from, unanimous across the board is everybody working from home bought 1 or 2 monitors, because they would have 2 monitors at the office and they didn't think that they would need it. They thought that was going to be like a week or 2 or whatever. And so they were just figuring they could just work on their laptop. And inevitably they had to buy a couple monitors so they could actually see stuff. And then the other one is that the number of people, when we were doing exercising during the first year of COVID, I guess, the number of people complaining about their kitchen chair being very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
When they sat on it for like 8 hours, they're like, I had to go buy a cushion. And then other people were like, I had to buy an actual office chair.
Office chair. Yeah.
And so it was like, so it's kind of interesting to see how they migrated stuff back and forth, but it's also interesting to see the workflows that groups are using to be able to, do their work, whether or not it's a workstation at home or if it's a laptop that they go back and forth with.
We'll be back with that solution after a brief message from our sponsor, KISSBCP.
Use King Phoenix and Shield with its mapping, its dashboards, its permissioning, its dependency mapping, and its automatically redacted plans to shield your business from chaos. KingsBridgeBCP.com.
So accounting, you mentioned accounting, and that to me has always been the most susceptible to a single point of failure of any department consistently, other than certain IT groups, I think. But I'm really curious because I think what the COVID experience would have changed in most places is that standalone antique desktop that used to run this one accounting app that was legacy that they swore they could never, ever, ever migrate away from. At some point during COVID, that problem had to get solved. And in my experience, it was always accounting that had it. That was always the department. Every place I ever worked or consulted, it was always accounting that when we did their BIA, what we would find was there was this one piece of equipment, this one application, and this one support person for something legacy related to accounting / payroll, that was always the trouble area for DR / BCP. And I think honestly, that's one of those things that probably got solved during COVID.
Oh yeah.
Because it became such a big risk factor that they had to find a solution for it. Whereas, some of the stuff survived Y2K and was still a legacy issue 15 years later. Right. But I think COVID probably solved the vast majority of those sort of one-offs.
Well, and it's interesting too, is that a lot of the stuff that got, I guess was always a sticking point. And it's in accounting / finance, depending on how the company defines their people that count the money. With credit unions, if they're doing any wire transfers or any like e-transfers or anything like that, it's always done through a Fedline router. And so they would have, 1 or 2 Fedline routers at headquarters because that's all they needed. Well, working through various credit unions, it's like, you guys really should have more than 1 of these or 2 of these, because if you have something the matter with headquarters, how are you going to do it? And so, they'd get more and they'd put them at alternate locations, and they had to have, RSA keys and everything like that, whatever, to be able to access them, to do this, that, or whatever. And then COVID happened. So how's that now working? Now, my suspicion is that what they've done is they've VPN'd into the Fedline router, and because they had said that they were never able to do it, it's probably because IT didn't necessarily want to support it. And once it became a requirement to be able to support it, then all of a sudden it just mysteriously happened. And I think that's probably, like you said, with a lot of the other stuff where they had like an archaic workstation or anything like that or whatever. It's just, it wasn't going to get solved until it got pushed. And convenience was not enough of a push, but something like COVID, where you couldn't come into the office, was a big enough push, because it's like, otherwise this isn't going to happen. Like, there's no way for us to do this. I do know that some of our credit union customers, they brought people into the office for like 20 minutes type thing, whatever, to run their Fedline stuff, and then they were out, so that they could keep the maximum number, or keep below the maximum number of people allowed in the office. But going forward, I haven't heard anybody complaining about Fedline routers in probably about a year. So that's a good sign. So but I guess it's that necessity is the mother of all invention, right? Is that until you're actually pushed to do it. And that's where the stuff like we were talking about earlier, where you're doing like evacuations and everything like that or whatever, is that until people are actually pushed to do them, they're not going to practice them. They're not going to do them. It's like everything is, that until it actually happens, you're like, oh yeah, that's right. We should know how to do this.
Well, and so, in that sense, COVID was a really good thing to happen for business continuity.
Oh, totally.
As an industry, right? the other thing is that, there are certain things that I think are s- experience slash location dependent. And by that, I mean, it really depends on where your business is located as to how you choose to respond to certain things. Um, here on the Gulf Coast, we have far more generators like per capita than somewhere like pick any other major metropolitan area that's not Florida, probably. Right? I mean, literally, like, if you compare, I mean, granted, Houston's the fourth largest city, so it's hard to find a comparison, but I'm going to say LA. I guarantee that Houston has per capita more generators, both individual and business, than LA.
So it'll be interesting to see that, because we started doing some exercising with our LA and San Diego customers with the public safety power shutoff, or PSPS shutoffs.
And that's probably,
And I'll be curious to see,
I probably
like,
should have picked something different than LA.
yeah, maybe not right now, because I mean, people are still buying them. But it's interesting to talk to when you're talking to different groups, wherever they're like, oh yeah, I can work from home. And you're like, okay, power's out. Can you work from home? Oh yeah, I got a generator, can totally run, my entire house. And 5 years ago, that was just non-existent. And
Right.
because everybody's like, well, why would the power go out? And it's like, well, now they've gone through a few of them, they're like, oh yeah, that's right, this power thing, it can be turned off.
It's
And
same thing here,
yeah, well,
you
because
know.
yeah, you were affected by the cold snap or whatever it was 5-6 years ago.
Well, no, the pipe freezing, which was a year and a half ago, was a huge thing in
No, there was
Houston. I
one that
mean,
was a little bit further ago.
hundreds of thousands of people had pipes burst. But no, part of it was the specific like hurricane events that Houston experienced.
Yeah.
Um, that's kind of what started it, I think. And then the occasional freezes that contributed to it. I would be curious though. I'd have to see if there's numbers to be found online about that. So maybe compared to Chicago, I'm going to say that despite how much cold weather Chicago has,
Yeah.
that the Houston metro area, there's way more per capita generators than there are in Chicago, even though Chicago has a whole lot more cold weather, and being without power is potentially a much bigger impact in the winter in Chicago than it ever is here in Houston. But my point on all of that is that a lot of our response, whether it's as individuals or as companies, is dependent upon the specific environmental factors that we operate in.
Yeah.
Right. So you're talking about fire drills and things, and how it's not necessarily practical to do that in the middle of a workday.
We'll be back with that solution after a brief message from our sponsor, KISSBCP.
Use King Phoenix and Shield with its mapping, its dashboards, its permissioning, its dependency mapping, and its automatically redacted plans to shield your business from chaos. KingsBridgeBCP.com.
And I'm wondering, I feel like, and this is anecdotal, but I feel like if you operate in or around Manhattan, that there is to this day a different mindset about evacuation drills because of 9/11. That is my sense. I don't have numbers to substantiate that, but I'm going to take a wild guess and say that any company that operates in or around Manhattan has a higher than normal likelihood of doing some kind of fire drill slash evacuation drill than downtown Houston, for example.
Yeah, and I know that the last time we ran any sort of like fire evacuation or whatever for, any of our customers, is that the biggest pushback that we got with it is that you couldn't do them unscheduled, because that was viewed as a traumatic event. And
Right.
so you had to schedule them. And as soon as you scheduled them, people would just mysteriously not be at the office, or they'd be at, out getting coffee or whatever, just coincidentally at that time, so that they didn't
Right.
have to do it. And you're like,
Yeah.
guys, come on. Like, this isn't rocket science, but getting you out of the building in some sort of orderly manner is. And the other part that's interesting from an exercising perspective is that when we do these exercises and they say they're going to like get everybody up and out of the office, not like they're actually doing exercise, but when they're talking about an evacuation, we ask them if it should be in their plans if they want to take their computers or not, because it's always if safety permits. Like, we're not asking anybody to like crawl under their desk or whatever, the fire's looking at their heels, or run through a wall of flames or whatever to get their laptop, because laptops are easy to replace, or easier to replace than the human is. But what we've had it with a few times with customers where they've got like either laptops sitting on their desk or in a docking station or whatever stuff this, and it's right there. And if they're sitting there, that it's fully expected they just go click and they take the laptop and they walk out of the building. And it's like, well, that makes sense, because then you get all the computers out of the building. You have to buy a lot fewer computers, and it just makes everything a lot easier from that perspective.
Yeah.
But we've also had IT departments that have said, nope, we don't want them doing that, because if they take the computers out into the parking lot and they drop them, and this is just an exercise or it's just a drill or whatever, that they've now dropped the computer out there and we're gonna have to replace it. Or if it's raining and it gets rained on or whatever, you're like, oh, okay. So now whenever we do exercises, we ask, do you expect your employees to take their laptops with them or not? And it's sort of 50-50 if they're like, yes, take them, or no, don't take them. And it's
interesting.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where everybody will ask, well, what's the best way?
Yeah, you
There
can argue either.
Yeah, you can argue either. It makes complete sense. The one thing that we do, and as you said about Chicago getting bad weather, and as anybody can tell with the accent, I'm in Canada, so we've got our fair share of bad weather up here, is that if you know it's forecasted that it's going to be 12 feet of snow tomorrow, take your laptop home with you. Like, just be semi-intelligent about it. But the things you can't plan is you can't plan for, you take your laptop home and you drop it, or you don't take your laptop home and the building has a gas leak. And so,
or you're out sick and everybody else took their laptop home, but you didn't because you got sick and didn't go into the office. So you had no anticipation of, and one of the things that, there's workarounds on all of this stuff, right?
Yep.
I mean, it's easy to set a policy to say you take your laptop home with you every day.
Yeah.
If you have that kind of a work environment, where, especially if you've got mostly salaried employees, for example, take your laptop home every day. I've worked plenty of places where like that was flat out just the expectation. And that prevents some of the, oh, well, it snowed 12 feet and now I don't have my laptop, right? But again, COVID changed a lot of this, because in a lot of working environments, you have equipment at home and you have equipment at the office. So it's so variable. And it really all does come back to how COVID changed the workplace and working environments for people. Going back to talking about tabletop exercises, there's, preparing the employee whether or not they're supposed to be taking their laptops home or not.
We'll be back with that solution after a brief message from our sponsor, Kingsbridge BCP.
Use King Phoenix and Shield with its mapping, its dashboards, its permissioning, its dependency mapping, and its automatically redacted plans to shield your business from chaos. KingsbridgeBCP.com.
What are you trying to get out of your tabletop exercise? Is it really getting people to think about what they would do in different types of scenarios? So is it mostly an employee training exercise that you're using your tabletop exercise for? Is it management training in the sense that, they're sometimes disengaged from the levels of planning that the practitioner engages with the various teams. And what you really need is for the executives to be forced to participate in an exercise, and you can engage them by a script that has injects that you've got commitment from the steering committee or the executives or whoever, that they're actually going to like meet and at these decision points to decide what happens next. And then in between the two, between sort of the training the employees versus training the executives on this, then you have the actual, okay, so we want to exercise our plan to make sure that everything that we thought would work actually will work. But you can't necessarily accomplish all three in one tabletop exercise.
Yeah, and
That can get really ambitious.
a lot of times what we get out of our exercises is that, because like you said, is that you've got one person or a few people in a company that's actually doing all of the updates to the plan. So it's in essence a practitioner who's got this on their to-do list, and this is something that they're getting to done. But if you're in HR, accounting, finance, sales, some sort of operations or whatever, you've got absolutely no interest in this whatsoever, and it's a bit of an annoyance every year.
Yeah.
And so what we want to do with it is to make them aware that there is a resource there that somebody has generally thought a lot about, to make sure that they know in the event of COVID, power failure, flooding, fire, whatever, that there is a resource there that they can lean on to use as almost like a treasure map to be able to take them from A to Z and not step off the island kind of thing. Especially as more of our plans become more and more and more mature, we're not really finding a ton of like gotchas that weren't there a year ago. What we're finding right now doing a lot of the exercising is that because the work environment and the work expectations has changed considerably, that you're almost having to do an update or a rewrite to some sections of the plan, which either are completely irrelevant now, or there's completely different responses to what the tasks are than what they had been doing before. And so once that gets sort of smoothed out or ironed out, I guess, that I could see it going back to that more that informational thing. Plus also with huge employee turnover right now, that you're having to do an education piece of it, where it's like, this is a resource for you to be able to lean on, to be able to pull from. And, in the event that something happens, what is the first thing you should be doing? Oh, I should be opening the app that houses the plan that allows me to see what I should be doing. It's like, congratulations.
Yeah.
And so those are because we do enough of these each year to be able to get all of that accomplished in one meeting is pretty doable now, because we do, obviously, there's a PowerPoint that talks about injects and time injects for the scenario itself. But at the beginning, we do a bit of a refresher for everybody, because even if it's somebody that's been with the company for 10 years and we've been doing their exercising for 6 years, they only hear from us once a year. And if I asked you a year ago, what did you have for breakfast on October the 17th? You're probably not going to remember.
Yeah.
And so as a result, we try to make it such that it's as easy for them as possible. We try not to do wholesale changes without giving them for sure a heads up for the individual business units, like for the leaders who have any sort of input on it, but then also for the people who are team, like just team members, like read only, making sure that they know that there's an app, making sure that they know that it's synchronized, and make sure that they know all this information is there. Because if they don't, they're going to ad hoc whatever it is, and they're going to completely take the response away from the plan, because that's inevitably what happens with ad hoc planning. So, or ad hoc responses, I guess, as opposed to planning.
That makes sense.
So yeah,
that makes sense. So thank y'all for joining us today. We hope you got something of use out of our chat this morning. We will see everybody next time. Hope you're tuning in. You can find us on all your usual podcast places.
And all of our social feeds as well are pushing to it. And this is the audio. Well, This is the podcast. So there's an audio aspect and a visual aspect to it. So this is the audio if you're listening to this through your podcast app, but it's also a visual on YouTube. And so there's a podcast audio version of it, and there's a video version of it. So everybody can access it from pretty much everywhere. You can run, but you cannot hide. We want to make sure that everybody knows about this all the time.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.